Karoline Leavitt, the 27-year-old White House press secretary, just set the Late Show stage ablaze in a way no one saw coming. Her opponent, none other than Stephen Colbert, America's king of satire, famous for taking down politicians with sharp-witted jabs aimed at Trump. But this time it was Colbert who found himself on the defensive on live TV. Leavitt, a Gen Z firebrand representing Trump's voice, a symbol of MAGA, came to fight. This was a clash between Gen Z's sharpness and old-school humor, between MAGA's fire and the arrogance of the media. With her razor-sharp style, undeniable facts, and unshakable confidence, Leavitt turned the stage into a verbal battlefield, leaving even Colbert's audience stunned. Colbert thought he'd easily take down the new girl with his usual quips. But he was wrong. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The stage lights blazed down on Karoline Leavitt as she stepped out with a confident smile. Stephen Colbert, in a sharp suit, sat behind his desk, eyes glinting with smugness. He knew he was the master here, and Leavitt, a 27-year-old, seemed like perfect prey. Karoline, welcome to the Late Show. Colbert began, his voice sweet but laced with cunning. Working for Trump must keep you busy. How do you ever sleep? With his midnight tweets, a classic Colbert opener, a jab just sharp enough to fluster a guest. Leavitt flashed a slight smile, her eyes cold as a razor's edge. Stephen, I sleep great every night, she said, her voice calm yet steely, because I know President Trump is putting America first. How about you? Do you sleep easy when you twist the truth every night for cheap laughs? The studio froze for a few seconds. No one expected a young woman to land such a swift, sharp counterpunch. Colbert paused, raising an eyebrow. His joke had just been flipped, and he was the one losing ground. Collar laughed loudly, trying to regain control. While you're quick, Karoline. But tell me, working for Trump, is it like babysitting? The audience laughed louder this time. He tilted his head, waiting for Leavitt to stumble. But the Gen Z woman didn't flinch. Babysitting? No, Stephen, she replied, her voice steady and powerful. Working for Trump is about leading the country through chaos, the kind of chaos media like you keep inflating. Want me to tell you about 3% economic growth? A few woos rose from the crowd. Leavitt didn't just dodge, she was throwing punches back. The control room staff exchanged glances, sensing the shift in the air. Collar leaned forward, smile intact, but eyes different. Economic growth sounds nice, he said with a hint of sarcasm. But what about Trump's tariff policies? Do Americans love paying more for Canadian milk? A trap question, targeting the controversy over prices under Trump's administration. The audience went quiet, waiting. Leavitt tilted her head, as if the question was too easy. Americans care more about jobs than cheap milk, Stephen, she shot back. Tariffs saved 2 million jobs last year. Want the exact numbers or just a headline for your show? One audience member yelled. That's right, causing the band to falter. Colbert chuckled, but it was strained. He tapped his desk, trying to keep the rhythm. Numbers? Huh, you sure know how to spice up a show, he said, his tone forcefully casual. But Leavitt wasn't done. Spicing things up is fine, Stephen, she continued, eyes locked on him. But the truth is better, like how we're rebuilding America. While you're just building jokes, want to talk jobs some more? Colbert pursed his lips, looking slightly off balance. For the first time, his team in the control room started whispering nervously. Realizing this young woman was no ordinary opponent, Colbert pivoted, trying to reclaim the upper hand. Karoline, you're only 27, he said with a touch of mockery. You must have learned a lot from Trump, like how to shock people. The audience laughed, but it was weaker this time. Leavitt smiled wider, as if she'd been waiting for it. Shock? No, Stephen, she replied. I learned to speak plainly, something your audience clearly likes, or should I explain more? The studio vibe had shifted. Leavitt was in control. Colbert kept smiling, but his eyes betrayed tension. He tapped his fingers on the desk, prepping his next question, but the audience could feel it. Leavitt had scored big. The stage was now a furnace, the air crackling after Karoline Leavitt's relentless counterattacks. Karoline stood there, eyes razor-sharp, turning Stephen Colbert's smug grin into a distant memory. Colbert, behind his desk, still smiled, but his fingers tapped faster on the wood, and his eyes hinted at strain. He was losing ground in the control room. His team exchanged tense looks, sensing the show tilting toward Leavitt. She, in a shimmering green dress under the lights, stood firm like a warrior, ready to escalate the battle. This was the moment the showdown heated up. Collar leaned in, voice tinged with sarcasm. Karoline, you talk about jobs, about America, he started, but Trump's always bragging about his achievements. Isn't that a bit overblown? The question targeted Trump's boastful style, hoping to Triple Leavitt into defending it awkwardly. The audience went silent, expecting a weak response. Colbert raised an eyebrow, his smile confident, thinking he'd landed a killer blow. Leavitt didn't blink. Overblown, Stephen, she shot back, voice firm but calm. Trump's proud of bringing millions of jobs back to America, of standing up for forgotten people. Overblown is when media like you hype up stories to keep ratings instead of facing facts. The crowd erupted, one person shouting, "She's right." Startling. Colbert, he laughed loudly, but it sounded forced. "Wow, you're sharp," he said, masking unease, but proud of controversial policies. Leavitt smiled as if the question was a gift. "Controversial policies, Stephen," she replied. "Like how we've cut healthcare costs, saving the average family 20% on insurance. Or do you prefer arguing about distractions to avoid Trump's successes?" Someone yelled. "She gets us," causing the control room to buzz with panic. Collar tapped his desk, eyes showing strain. "Health care savings sounds nice," he said with a mocking edge. "You're making me feel like I'm watching a campaign ad." Leah didn't let him off. "A campaign ad? No, Stephen," she countered. "I'm bringing truth here, like how we've lowered drug prices, helping seniors live better." "Got any truth to share? Or just jokes to hide it?" Collar laughed, but it was stiff. He glanced at his teleprompter, looking for an escape. For the first time, his team whispered, urgently realizing this girl was no pushover. Colbert shifted gears, trying to regain rhythm. "Karoline, you represent Trump," he said, voice but sharp. "But what about criticism of his transparency? Don't Americans want more clarity?" The question aimed at Trump's management controversies, hoping to make Leavitt slip. The audience hushed the tension. Thick. Leavitt tilted her head, her smile cutting. "Transparency, Stephen," she replied. "We've laid out every plan, like cutting living costs, raising minimum wages in multiple states." "Real transparency is you admitting the media inflates criticism to distract." "Need more explanation?" Colbert pursed his lips, showing unease. For the first time, he tapped his fingers faster, searching for a new question. "Plan sounds grand," he said, trying to stay calm. "Grand is good, Stephen," she pressed, eyes unwavering. "We're building a future for Americans, while you're just building TV moments." "Want to talk about the future?" The audience exploded, cheers and applause shaking the studio. Karoline Leavitt stood there, eyes blazing, turning Stephen Colbert's domain into her own stage. Colbert, behind his desk, clung to his signature smile, but his hand gripped his pen tightly, and his wavering eyes showed he was losing the fight. In the control room, his team swapped tense glances, realizing this Gen Z woman was taking over. Leavitt, her green dress gleaming under the lights, smiled like someone who knew victory was hers. The war of words was now hers. Colbert cleared his throat, trying to find his footing. "Karoline, you sure know how to heat things up," he said with a hint of sarcasm. "But honestly, Trump's policies like tax cuts for the rich, do they really help regular Americans?" A dangerous jab, hitting the critique that Trump favored the elite. The audience went silent, waiting for Leavitt to falter. Colbert tilted his head, his smile back, thinking he'd found her weak spot. Leavitt didn't waver. "The rich, Stephen," she replied, voice solid as steel. "Our tax cuts helped 80% of American households save hundreds a year. Regular workers, plumbers, supermarket clerks are keeping their money. Want me to send you a list of people thanking Trump?" Colbert laughed, but it lacked life. "A list? You're making me curious," he said, trying to sound playful, but his grip on his pen tightened. Colbert pivoted, trying another angle to trap her. "Karine, you talk about regular Americans," he continued, voice smooth but cutting. "But Trump's called immigration an invasion. Do people really want to hear that?" The question targeted Trump's divisive rhetoric, hoping to rattle Leavitt. Before a diverse crowd, a few murmurs rose, eyes on her. Leavitt smiled, eyes fixed on Colbert. "People want the truth, Stephen," she replied. "Illegal immigration strains cities, costing taxpayers billions. We've strengthened borders, making communities safer, schools less crowded. Want to talk about Americans losing homes too? Costs? I've got numbers." One audience member raised a hand, shouting, "She gets us," sending the control room into chaos. Colbert raised an eyebrow, forcing a smile. "Numbers? You love those," he said, but his voice wavered, searching for an out. In the control room, a producer shook their head, muttering, "She won't stop." Collar tried to rally. "Karoline, you stand for Trump, but he flip-flops a lot. How do you keep up?" The audience chuckled, but it was faint, as if waiting for her counter. She tilted her head, smile sharp. "Keep up, Stephen," she replied. "I don't need a class to know what Americans want: stable jobs, safe streets. What have you learned hosting this besides making people laugh when it's not needed?" Colbert pursed his lips, eyes showing confusion. He tapped his pen, frantically hunting for a new question. "Job safety sounds nice," he said, trying to stay steady, "but Karoline doesn't Trump's style, always attacking, hurt America's image." A last-ditch effort, hoping to tie her up in international criticism. Leavitt smiled wider. "Hurt America's image, Stephen," she replied. "America's stronger when we bring jobs home, stop billions flowing overseas. Trump's style is straight talk, not dodging like some on TV want to." Talk Image asked this audience, whose winning the air was electric, almost suffocating. Karoline Leavitt had turned Colbert's loyal crowd, once his cheerleaders, into her own standing, and clapping wildly. Colbert, behind his desk, forced a smile, but his hand gripped his pen till his knuckles whitened, his eyes lost, knowing he was beaten. In the control room, his team neared panic, one producer muttering, "She's destroying him." Colbert took a deep breath, voice slightly shaky, but pushing on. "Karoline, you talk about America, about people," he began with a touch of desperation. "But Trump keeps attacking allies like Canada, like NATO. Do Americans want a president who embarrasses the country?" A risky strike targeting Trump's controversial diplomacy, hoping to trip Leavitt. Before a global audience, the studio went silent, all eyes on her. Leavitt tilted her head, her smile ablaze. "Embarrassed, Stephen," she replied, voice unwavering. "Trump fights for American interests, not to please European summits. We've demanded fair trade, saved billions from NATO, so Americans aren't stuck with more debt. You want people paying for allies who don't chip in." A group of audience members stood, one shouting, "She's right." The band stopped, helpless against the wave of support. Colbert laughed, but it sounded like a sigh. "Fair trade, how you make it sound so simple," he said, voice faltering, fingers tapping endlessly. Collar tried, pivoting, eyes darting to his teleprompter. "Karoline," he said with a mocking edge, as press secretary, "aren't you scared of getting caught in Trump's controversies? Don't you worry about messing up?" A jab at her youth, hoping to expose inexperience. The audience hushed, waiting for weakness, but Leavitt just smiled broader. "Scared, Stephen," she replied. "Scared is hosting a show, and no one laughs at your jokes. I'm not afraid of mistakes. I'm here for the truth. And the audience is listening." Colbert pursed his lips, eyes blank, like he'd been hit square in the chest. In the control room, producers nearly jumped up, one muttering, "Cut to commercial now." Colbert tried to steady himself, voice quivering. "Truth, you say it well," he said, forcing a smile. "But Karoline, Trump's been sued, criticized for ethics you work for him." Without any doubts, a final swing leaning on Trump's scandals to shake her. The audience murmured, tension tight as a wire. Leavitt stood tall, eyes never leaving Colbert. "Doubt, Stephen," she replied. "I work for someone who's brought millions of jobs to America, who fights for forgotten people." Criticism, that's the game of people, like you trying to dim success with TV drama. The audience wants truth, not your script. Colbert tried to laugh, but his face palled, his hand snapping his pen. Colbert fumbled, voice cracking. "So anyone want to talk about new Hollywood movies?" he said, clumsily changing topics. The audience cheered, not from humor, but his desperation. Someone shouted, "She's won." Shaking the studio again, Leavitt smiled, her eyes saying, "I'm done here." In the control room, a producer yelled, "Kill the cameras." But it was too late. Colbert glanced at his team, eyes pleading, but no one could save him. Audience members raised phones, filming Leavitt standing tall, her green dress sparkling under the lights. A middle-aged man shouted, "She speaks for us," while a young woman held a handwritten sign, "Jen's leads." Applause lingered, mixed with boos aimed at Colbert. "Once the king of this stage," one audience member laughed, pointing at him. "You're done, Stephen." Leavitt, poised and graceful, nodded slightly to the crowd, as if thanking them for taking her side. She stepped back, letting the lights focus on Colbert, but it was the light of defeat. Colbert tried to compose himself, but his voice wavered. Thank you, Karoline," he mumbled, hands trembling as he set down his pen. He glanced at the audience, hoping for their usual applause, but got only scattered laughs and curious stares. He looked to his crew off stage, eyes begging for help, but they just looked down, avoiding his gaze. In the control room, a producer slammed the desk. "We've lost control." Another muttered, "She's ruined the show." The cameras kept rolling, capturing Colbert's ashen face, his smile now a hollow shell. He tried to add, "We'll go to commercial," but his voice drowned in the crowd, still chanting Leavitt's name. Leavitt, with the calm of a victor, left the stage, but her presence lingered. Social media was already erupting even before the show ended. On X, posts flooded in like a tsunami. "Karoline Leavitt just torched the late show," one wrote, with a clip of her smiling as Colbert stammered. Another went viral, "Colbert thought he'd win, but Karoline's the queen." #SC Karoline rules and #Colbert crashed trended with thousands of shares in minutes. One user posted, "First time I've seen Colbert speechless," with a pic of him snapping his pen. Colbert's fans tried to fight back. He was just being polite, but they were drowned out by Leavitt's wave of support. Outside the studio, Colbert's team's phones buzzed nonstop. Reporters were already texting, demanding comments on this disaster. The staffer muttered, "Will be talked about for a week." Meanwhile, Leavitt, fresh off the stage, stood backstage, eyes still bright. She pulled out her phone, quickly posting on X, "Thanks to the audience for standing with the truth." The post instantly got thousands of likes, with comments like, "You made mega proud," and "Colbert had no chance." On X, #SC Karoline rules and #Colbert crash dominated trends with millions of views in hours. A short clip of Leavitt's line, "Scared is when you host and no one laughs," was shared tens of thousands of times with comments like, "She burned the Late Show down." One user wrote, "Karoline proves Gen Z isn't just TikTok, they can make the media beg." TikTok jumped in with Gen Z making videos mimicking Leavitt's icy stare, turning her into a pop culture icon. A viral clip with millions of likes showed Leavitt striding on stage with the caption, "When you're 27 and shut down Hollywood." Young people from rural towns to cities shared her story as a reminder anyone can make waves, but not everyone cheered. Colbert's loyal fans pushed back on X, claiming he was just being polite or didn't want to argue with a young woman. One post with thousands of likes read, "Colbert let her win because he's a pro." But these efforts were quickly buried under Leavitt's support. A user replied, "Pro." He snapped his pen and stammered. The image of Colbert's broken pen became a meme everywhere with captions like, "When you think you're king but meet Karoline." The online divide mirrored America today. One side saw Leavitt as a flame of truth, the other, as a threat of controversy. Mainstream media got swept up. Two major outlets rushed out analyses with headlines from "Leavitt beats Colbert on his turf" to "The Late Show's TV disaster." One piece noted Leavitt didn't just talk, she turned Colbert's audience against him. A first conservative commentators hailed her as MAGA's new star, calling the interview a generation-defining moment. An editor wrote, "She turned satire into her weapon, leaving Colbert to shadow." Liberal critics meanwhile warned of Leavitt's danger, saying she used the stage to amplify division. One article argued, "She didn't debate, she performed, and that's troubling, but love her or hate her, no one denied." Leavitt made the media talk about her. Politicians didn't stay silent either. Trump supporters quickly spoke up with conservative leaders, sharing the interview clip on X, calling Leavitt the future of the movement. One senator posted, "Karoline speaks for millions of Americans the media ignores." Meanwhile, opponents tried to downplay it, but even they had to admit her pull. A liberal lawmaker commented, "She knows how to steal the spotlight, we've got to learn that." Leavitt didn't just beat Colbert, she made the political world rethink how to reach young voters, who were now swept up in her fire on TikTok. And X audience members at the studio shared on social media, "I came to see Colbert but left impressed by Karoline." One wrote on X, "When she spoke I felt represented, but not everyone agreed." Another posted, "She just attacked Colbert, should have been tougher." The divide spread from the studio to online, with groups debating fiercely, was Leavitt truly for the people, or just a MAGA star who could act? Either way, her name was etched into millions of minds. Back in the studio, Colbert sat frozen, the lights mocking his face. The audience hadn't stopped clapping, some even leaving their seats, as if the show ended with Leavitt's. When the control room team stopped arguing, sinking into silence, knowing they'd witnessed history. The storm on the Late Show stage had settled, but the aftershocks of Karoline Leavitt's victory still rocked every corner of media and politics. The 27-year-old Gen Z White House press secretary didn't just humiliate Stephen Colbert, the once unbeatable king of satire. She turned his turf into her launchpad. The studio minutes ago roaring with chants of Karoline MAGA now held a heavy silence. Colbert, with a shattered smile and a broken pen, became a symbol of old media's defeat. Leavitt, with blazing eyes and a queen's poise, was the flag of a new generation. But what made this win, and why does it matter? Beyond one interview, Leavitt didn't win just with smarts or data, though she had both. She won because she understood the audience, the era, and how to turn Colbert's stage into her weapon. While Colbert leaned on snarky jokes, Leavitt brought sincerity, truth, and a Gen Z style unafraid of confrontation. She didn't dodge or sugarcoat, she charged into battle, turning every question into a chance to speak. For millions who felt ignored by the media when the audience stood holding signs like Gen Z leads or live streaming her victory smile, they weren't just cheering Leavitt, they were cheering a generation daring to challenge the status quo. 3 decades ago, Bill Clinton played saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show, shattering the stiff politician image, connecting with young voters. Through relatability, Leavitt did the same. But bolder, she didn't need an instrument, she used words sharp as knives to turn a Trump hostile show into a mega arena like Barack Obama once dominated TV with hope. Leavitt seized it with truth and confidence, but she did it against a seasoned foe on his home turf. Her victory wasn't just personal, it was a symbol of Gen Z's power raised on TikTok X, and a world skeptical of traditional media. Colbert didn't lose for lack of talent, he's a stage master. But he misjudged. He thought Leavitt, young and tied to Trump, would be easy to overwhelm. He didn't expect Gen Z plays by new rules. Liv didn't just answer, she attacked, turning his jokes into her ammo. When he awkwardly pivoted to Hollywood movies, the audience laughed, not at humor, but at his failure. Colbert, stuck in his familiar style, was trapped in his own kingdom, unable to adapt to an opponent unfazed by stage lights. Leavitt's when raises a big question: does traditional media still have power in a Gen Z-shaped world? She didn't just take down Colbert, she challenged the system he represents when her ex-post, thanks to the audience for standing with the truth, got thousands of shares when #Karoline Rules trended. She proved power now lies in platforms like X and TikTok, where youth don't need a TV desk to be heard. TikTok videos of Gen Z reenacting Leavitt's victory smile showed a generation ready to write its own story. No media approval needed. Leavitt did something rare. She turned an interview into a manifesto. She spoke for those who feel mocked by the media, called backward for their beliefs when the audience shouted, "She speaks for us." In the studio, they weren't just cheering Leavitt, they were cheering a movement, a generation rising. She showed Gen Z isn't just memes and live streams, they're a political force ready to face anyone. Even an icon like Colbert. Leavitt proved a 27-year-old could shake a TV show with just truth and courage, but her win also warns traditional media adapt or fade. As the audience left the studio, as social media buzzed with her name, one thing was clear: Leavitt isn't just a press secretary, she's Gen Z's flame. And it's spreading. Colbert, with his broken pen and fading smile, was just her first step. Karoline Leavitt swept the Late Show stage clean, leaving a rattled studio. And as Stephen Colbert with a broken smile, she didn't just humiliate the king of satire, she rewrote the rules of media and politics. She's the spark of a new administration, where youth seize the reins to shape the future, and icons like Colbert face the risk of fading. This one wasn't just a moment, it was a revolution. Leavitt pulled off the unthinkable. She turned Colbert's stage where politicians once trembled into her springboard. She didn't need a script or teleprompter. With razor-sharp confidence, she turned every jab from Colbert into a chance to speak for millions who feel mocked by the media. When the audience roared, holding signs like Gen Z leads and live streaming her standing tall, they weren't just cheering Leavitt, they were recognizing a new force. She proved a young woman armed with courage and truth could rattle a media empire. Colbert, with his broken pen and lost eyes, became a lesson for anyone daring to underestimate Gen Z's power. Karoline became a symbol not just for Trump supporters, but for a generation seeking a voice. On TikTok, thousands of Gen Z videos mimicked her confident poise, making her a model for youth wanting to challenge power. On X, posts hailed her as Mega's queen or Colb's conqueror, hitting millions of views, while conservatives called her the movement's future. Even those who disagreed admitted Leavitt changed how politics is presented. She didn't just speak, she inspired, turning values like patriotism and candor into a flame, drawing young voters. Meanwhile, Colbert and The Late Show faced an unprecedented crisis. Online posts questioned, is Colbert still relevant? Some called the interview a TV disaster. With his broken pen a viral meme, some fans defended him, saying he was just polite. But even they couldn't deny Colbert was outmatched. He and his team now face pressure to reshape the show to win back an audience Leavitt stole. But can they adapt to a world where Gen Z, swift and fearless, is rewriting the rules? Karoline became an inspiration for millions of youth across America, from small towns to big cities, who once thought politics was for elites on platforms like X. Users called her a guiding flame, sharing how a girl from New Hampshire, unafraid of stage lights, made the world notice. She changed how young politicians connect with the public. Before politicians leaned on scripted speeches or controlled interviews, Leavitt smashed that mold, stepping into the lion's den, Colbert's stage, and making it her moment. She didn't need long scripts, she used sincerity and sharp arguments to bond directly with the audience, like when the studio shook with shouts of Gen Z leads. This sent a bold message to future politicians in a world of live streams and X posts. Truth and relatability trump flashy performances. Leavitt didn't just inspire, she forced traditional media to rethink itself. After what some outlets called Colb's disaster, shows like The Late Show faced a tough question: are they still the public's voice? As memes of Colb's broken pen spread, as young viewers ditched him for Leavitt on TikTok, producers realized they couldn't rely on satire to hold an audience. One online analysis noted Leavitt exposed old media's weakness. They laugh, but no one listens. Other shows started booking younger, dynamic guests, but none could recreate Leavitt's moment of turning a stage into a battlefield. She set a new bar: media must engage, not just perform. Leavitt's win also shook American politics. Conservative leaders saw her as a rising star, someone who could pull in young voters, a group they'd struggled with. Some called her a game share, able to make traditional values modern. Meanwhile, her opponents, from liberal commentators to rival politicians, had to admit her influence. One article conceded, Leavitt doesn't just talk, she makes people believe. She proved politics doesn't have to be dry, it can be a stage where a young woman makes the nation listen. Gen Z isn't just the future, they're the present, and Leavitt is their flag bearer. She showed that in a divided world, truth and courage can break any barrier. Even The Late Show's stage lights the story of Karoline Leavitt's triumph over Stephen Colbert on The Late Show mirrors the polarization and change in today's American society, where new generations challenge traditional power structures in today's context with social media like X and TikTok shaping opinion, and traditional media, often doubted for bias. Leavitt's story is a beacon of confidence and era-seizing ability. She didn't just take down Colbert, the icon of old satire, with sharpness and sincerity. She turned his stage into a platform to speak for those who feel overlooked, like when the audience shouted, "She speaks for us." This reflects a truth in America. People, especially youth, crave voices that represent them, not just jokes or sensational headlines. The lesson from this story is to dare to stand up and speak your truth, even against giants. Leavitt, just 27, didn't let youth or stage lights shake her. She prepared, thoroughly answered with data and courage, like when she left Colbert reeling with "Scared is when you host and no one laughs in real life." America, whether you're a student debating in class, an employee pitching to a boss, or a young person sharing views online, learn from Leavitt. Study hard, trust your worth, and don't fear challenging authority. When social media exploded with #Karoline rules, it showed the power of connecting authentically with a community. Be someone who steps onto the stage like Leavitt and turns every challenge into a chance to shine. Subscribe to the channel to explore more moments when Gen Z shakes the world, like Karoline Leavitt did to Colbert. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video for more epic word battles.